All right, back again. This is Sethikus Boza, Black Earth Productions, Blue Flame Healing Arts, and Occult Science. And again, tonight I am speaking with the Thunder Wizard, Michael William Denney, and I am excited to have him on again for a second round, getting into the ancient tradition of our ancestors, getting into Nordic shamanism, getting into Saving Galder, and a lot of other things. Michael, I want to welcome you back to Black Earth Productions. It's great to see you again, man. How's things going?
Good, man. I'm really stoked to see you again. I'm really excited for what we're going to talk about. Really powerful stuff. I can feel it.
So since the last time we spoke, how do you see things developing on your end in context to everything?
I guess the best way to answer that is I'm seeing things speeding up. We've definitely shifted into something new, and it's speeding up to the point where there's less lag time. When you make a decision, when you invest in a feeling, indulge in a reaction, intend something, I'm seeing things happening instantaneously now where it would have taken time. So for people who aren't ready for that, or for people who are living in the, what I would say the old Piscean way of doing things, which is seeing that there are people above us and then there are the servants beneath, and that's the setup. Whereas the Aquarian age is saying, we are coming together and becoming independent, and we are becoming self-sufficient while at the same time having cooperative relationships with others, because that's what it represents. And people who are going in the old Piscean way of doing things are crashing and burning faster than ever, and it's like a train wreck. And those people who are taking risks and moving toward things, it's like, shit is coming at them, success is coming at them in ways that they never thought, and they're having to, wow, what do I do? It's like being on a roller coaster ride. So I'm in that space too, where I'm having to sit myself down and say, hey, don't fuck this up. This is where things are going. It's not moving in another direction. It's going to keep going in this direction. So,
yeah, all of that in context, I could say, is what I am touching upon when I talk about the spiral is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. The gate is before us. The gate is there. But unless you're in alignment with it, you're not going to pass through that gate.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you brought up the way that we are conducting ourselves now with what's unfolding. And I find myself having to go at pace with everything because I tend to sometimes rush out ahead of myself. The scorpionic nature, like Aries, ruled by Mars, we just want to go for it. And that's been my attitude with things, and it's served me quite well. But I can see how strategy is necessary for what's unfolding, and realizing that we are integrating so much, so fast, all at once. It's hard for the brain sometimes to process certain things. So you do got to take time to do ritual. You do got to take time to pull back and just reflect upon everything that is being revealed to you as an individual, so that you can actually apply it to your existence instead of it being, kind of all up in your head and you don't know what's what. And since the last time we spoke, my connection to the ancestors and the gods and the goddesses has definitely become more powerful. I've had more dreams and visions and a lot more insight come to me into study with the mythos. And there's a lot of things I want to get into with you tonight in context to the age that we are coming into. You talked about the age of Aquarius, the age of technology, the age of knowledge coming back to the forefront, where we are really starting to remember who the fuck we are as not only individuals, but as a people, all races, all tribes, all creeds. The ancestors are awakening. One of the first things I want to get into with you is the first war that took place between the Aesir and the Vanir, and why it happened. That's the very first thing I want to get into with you, man, because that war, the play out of that within the unconscious, subconscious, is still something that we have going on within ourselves. And I would really like you to get into that now and unpack why this war took place.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it. So the Aesir Vanir War, for those who may or may not be familiar with it, the Aesir, who represent the celestial deities, and the Vanir, who represent the terrestrial deities. In the beginning of the universe, one of the terms for the Vanir is the elder gods. It has nothing to do with who came first. It has nothing to do with linear time. And so I'm going to explain what that means. But in order to first understand this war, we have to understand who these beings are, what they represent. And bear in mind, this is the beginning of the universe. And so if we apply it to ourselves, it's the beginning of any venture. It's the beginning of any relationship. It's the beginning of any awareness. You know, whether we're talking about a person's life, life of the universe, the life of an idea, it has a span of its existence. And in the beginning, there will be this war. So the Aesir represent the celestial deities, the celestial deities. And the Vanir represent the terrestrial. So what happens in that war, let's focus on the entity known as Golveg, which translates as the lust for gold. Now, according to the mythology, the lust for gold comes in and infects the Aesir, which then they see as a threat to their existence, and they then create this war with the Vanir. And then their ramparts, which means that their stone walls are ruptured. So understand that the Aesir live in one of 9 worlds. They live in the fort of the celestial gods. There's only one other fort in the 9 worlds, and that is Midgard, the middle fortress, which is where we live. All the other 7 worlds do not have fortress walls. So this is an important detail in the mythology. So this war between the Aesir and the Vanir, when it starts, it ruptures their wall, their fortress wall. And this has to happen. If it doesn't happen, the universe will not come into existence. So we first have to understand that everybody's experience is narcissistic, including these celestial deities. So from their experience, anything that violates what they narcissistically want to experience, they perceive as a threat. Golveg means the lust for gold. So gold represents power, specifically the power of the elite, the power of the ruling class. And now the Aesir are filled with this lust for gold, this lust for power. That means that they didn't have that before. So now we have to ask the question, why? If we're talking about the creation of the universe, we have to understand where the different entities function. The Vanir live in Vanaheim, which is the home of change, experience, time, magic, fertility. That's why they're called the elder gods, not because they're older, but because they function within time, which means they experience and they gain wisdom through their experience. And their experiences through fertility, through sex, through creation, through indulgence. The Vedic equivalent of the Vanir is the Asuras, and they're seen as demons. They don't use the word demons like we do in the Western world. They use it in a different way, which means they're seeing things from the perspective of the celestial deities, and they see the Asuras as something that will taint them. This is the perception of the celestial deities. So the celestial deities live in timeless perfection. So it's important to understand that as the universe was beginning, the forces that we would call the Aesir lived in this static, bright, pure, timeless perfection. And that's because time had not come into existence yet in our universe yet. Once time started coming into existence, that was the eruption of the Vanir, who then infected the Aesir with the need to feel that they had to control things, because now things are out of control. From their perspective, everything's falling apart. Death, disease, corruption, greed, all of these things. And what's interesting is they themselves are the ones that first corrupted with the need to control, because now things are out of control. They hate that about themselves, and so instead of focusing on themselves, they focus on the Vanir, because like stars are constantly ejecting energy out. Unless we're talking about a black hole, energy is constantly going out. So the Aesir, that way, they project. Everything is a projection. which is why when we have people who are really super religious, they identify with the celestial deities, and they are also very judgmental because they project everything out. Whereas if you have people who are worshiping the Vanir or the Roker or those kinds of things, you find a different mindset. They'll be more tolerant, they'll be more open-minded to change and things that are forbidden. See what I mean? So we have to have this change. We have to have change, time, death, destruction, things that we would perceive as negative. We have to have it. Otherwise, the universe doesn't come into existence, period. End of story. Let's talk about how stars work, and you'll understand what it's like to be a celestial deity. They have so much mass and so much gravity that the molecules of the gas are being compressed to the point where they're, we have, what do you call that? Nuclear
fusion.
Nuclear fusion, right. Which is, it's not breaking it apart, it's compressing it down, and that explosion of compressing it down is what creates the light, the heat, all of that. So as long as that process is going on, they're going to burn themselves out. That's why they don't want time to come in. And this is where we get Indra and Thunar, and these gods act as the buffer between the two worlds. And you have a question that you asked me about that, which we can get to, but first we'll understand this. They create this buffer. Without those boundaries, nothing would exist. So according to the Vedic mythology, what we have is the sun, which is a celestial deity, just like I represented, sits in the east and worships Indra for the power to rule and long life, which means that if it weren't for the thunder god who creates those boundaries, if it weren't for the magnetic force which slows down the impact of gravity, then the sun would burn itself out. This is what the Aesir are trying to constantly have, which means if they had their way, everything would come to a standstill, which means we would come to a standstill. We wouldn't be able to function. So people have to understand this when they want to identify with the Aesir as the true and the pure. Understand that if they became that, or if the Aesir had complete control, their life would come to a standstill. And so that's why they started that war. And so that war represents the beginning of time to create. And that, of course, is going to come to an end, which we would call Ragnarok. And that is going to culminate, and the gods are going to die. And they simply don't want to die. So.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me getting into the war of the Aesir and the Vanir was Golveg. And I have another question for you. Is Golveg one of the Jotun?
It's a good question because, she could definitely morph into that. I see her as simply the force that expresses itself, because it's interesting. It's not like we hear about her living among the Vanir and doing this. She all of a sudden just appears.
Right. And that's one of the things I wanted to get into with you in context to the Old Ones' resurgence into the realm of Anaheim, which was a great concern of Odin because he knew what the Old Ones' agenda was. And getting into study with this, what I discovered is that Golveg, who I think is actually one of the Jotun, started to teach dark sorcery to the Vanir.
Right.
And, that was the main concern with the Aesir.
And the Aesir, if we look at the myth, it's because the Aesir started lusting after that dark sorcery, which is control. Because what is magic? Magic is the attempt to change, control reality. The Aesir aren't comfortable with that. Let me give you a different perspective on it. That's their self-directed insecurity, their guilt. They lusted after it.
That's their unconscious projection manifesting.
They lusted after they started wanting that because things started changing and they wanted to preserve themselves. And so they started going after the very thing that they said they hate. And then what happens? They start judging themselves, and then they start a war.
Mm-hmm.
You guys brought this into us. They didn't. The myths are clear. it just sort of erupted as a result of the Vanir coming into existence.
Right. As a result of the unconscious projection, I would say, of all the celestial gods.
Yeah.
And their unconscious intention. Now, the interesting thing I'm discovering with the dynamic between the Aesir and the Vanir, this is us.
Yeah.
This is us in projection and reflection.
Yep.
And in context to dark sorcery, this is an issue. This is an issue all across the board because of that lust for gold, that lust for power, that lust of wanting to be in the position of domination and control.
Yeah.
Now, when I got into study with this, I didn't see Odin necessarily wanting to be in control of anything. He was just trying to preserve the harmony of the universe. But it didn't fucking matter. It happens, right? It all went down, and Odin didn't have the magic of Scythe before that. He didn't know it. He didn't understand it. He had the runes, obviously. But there was this other element getting into Scythe and Galder, the true magic of the ancestors, and how both are necessary for that balance and harmony to be solidified in the universe. And so magic being neutral, it can go either way. And when it's not in alignment, it's gonna throw everything into fucking chaos, which is what happened with the Aesir and the Vanir. And both of them on either side became vain. They became vain in their own eyes. And I think, honestly, that it was a trick of the Jotun, of the Thors, trying to slip in and then take control over the whole goddamn fucking gamut. And I think that both the Aesir and the Vanir were tricked. They were tricked to go to war with one another and not seeing the true enemy which was that unconscious mental projection that then manifested in their reality, in their worlds, and everything that unfolded. You know what I'm saying?
So let me jump in here for a second.
Yeah.
All right. So remember, everything starts with an assumption. If we change our assumption, everything else changes. So let's change the assumption a little bit. And you mentioned Odin. Now, when you mention Odin, I see this very mischievous, I see Odin as very mischievous. Loki would be the shadow side of Odin. They're both mischievous. So what if Odin starts the war knowing, not trying to prevent the chaos, but knowing it will start the chaos?
Right. There's all these different ways we can look at it.
So go there with that. And he's
right.
doing this, and the Aesir are here, and they're stuck, and the Vanir are there. And he says, let's get this train rolling here.
Mm-hmm.
And so he starts the war with the knowledge of wanting to create that chaos that we think we don't want. You know how I feel about enlightenment. I do not believe that there is such a thing as a static achieved. I just don't believe that.
Right, like an arrival point with it.
It's just, that to me is denial.
Right.
Life is all about this dynamic change. If you look at, I'm wearing here, this is the reason why the Christians hijacked this symbol is because this represents dynamic balance of the 5 elements and the forces of the universe. And so if you want to mess with things, then you have like this kind of a cross. That's like right. You're messing with things on a psychological level. But if you want to bring dynamic balance, you wear this. So on one side you have the east, and then you have the west. This represents the giants, like you were talking about, which are the forces of expansion. Without it, there's no life. Life starts with an expansion. On the other side, you have constriction, which is the Vanir, which represents wind. This represents ether, this represents wind. And it's like also a breath. In order to live, you have to inhale. If you keep inhaling, you're going to explode. At some point, the inhalation has to stop, and then you have to exhale. But they're opposite each other, expansion and constriction. So when we look at it from that perspective, then there isn't any good guy or bad guy. They each have their own agenda. And if left to itself, imbalance is nothing more than one person's agenda takes too much space, and it's taking out the rest of everything. So there's always a war, and this happens, and then you put that out, and then the fire comes, and then the water comes, and then the heat, and then the cool. It has to do that, otherwise it's just static nothing, which is denial. That's death. For the Aesir, they need that to survive. That to live eternally means no more movement. For the Vanir, it's like we have to move. So don't try and stop that. Let's figure out a way how to overcome these elites. The elites are saying, let's figure out a way to keep these guys out of our... It all depends on where you are. We're in the middle.
Right.
So we are going to be constantly being torn apart in all kinds of different directions. The illusion is, if we let ourselves get talked into buying into somebody's agenda, whether it be the Aesir or the Vanir or the Jotuns or whomever, that's why we have the elves. Of all of the beings, the elves are the closest to being in full dynamics. And even they are on their way out. You know, they're standing at the edge of existence, and they're looking back, and they're giving knowledge, but they're going somewhere we don't even understand. To us, it's death. We don't even understand. And it's all perspective. For instance, like martial arts, right? When you put committed force towards me, I'm going to redirect that. So I trained in a completely different kind of martial art, which I won't go into explaining here, but it doesn't go into either of those kinds of things. And so the jiu-jitsu guys would want to fight, and they operate on very similar kinds of things. And I would say, okay, and I would walk towards them, and then they would try to lock me up into something, and the next thing I knew, I was behind them. Say, how did you do that? And I said, I didn't do anything. I didn't give you anything. And they don't know what to do. We're like that in life, in religion. You want to side with the Aesir or the Vanir or the Jotuns or attack. If we don't do that, we end up in the middle. And all of this energy flows through and around us. This is why human beings have the potential to be greater than all the gods, if only they can realize that they are everything. Odin is the representation of that on the celestial, because he did that. He died to himself, which is just like going up against an opponent and giving them nothing to fight. And then what ends up happening is you destroy yourself through all of that energy coming through you. And if you can keep your identity in the space of not having an identity, you are Odin. But even we have the ability to have Odin look upon us that way. We have an ability to experience limitation and be beyond it. This is what it's all about. But the illusion is to pick a team.
Right.
Once you pick the team, then you can be defeated and you can be destroyed.
Exactly. And that is getting into the mystery of all mysteries. And this is what Odin told me.
Yeah.
This is what Odin showed me. He said, you need both. We are both the light and the darkness. We need both the magic of the Aesir and the Vanir in alignment with what is beyond even the gods. Okay? And the reason I think this war took place, both sides could not see the darkness within themselves. Their projection of you know, taking the fuck over and being the ones in the position of domination and control. And that's that lust for gold. Golveg, that's that Jotun consciousness. That's that Thor's daemon shit that we are all dealing with, even the gods and goddesses.
Yeah.
Getting into soul code genetics and the distortions. And you're talking about the cross, right? The Christian cross is a distortion of that cross that you've got there. It's an inversion. And it's actually in the DNA. You can look it up. It's fucking nuts. But this cross is literally in the DNA as a distortion of consciousness, man. It's in the DNA, like scientifically fucking proven, right? So no wonder they took that, and it's right on down to the level of the DNA on an unconscious, subconscious level where it's running our fucking systems, and we don't even know it's fucking happening.
That's brilliant.
And that's why the the ancestors are starting to awaken, because they're starting to push this out. The Vanir and the Aesir, they're coming together. They're making peace again, like it talks about in the Eddas. This story is going to keep playing itself out again and again and again with humanity until we fucking catch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
You mentioned in your email to me, you mentioned Hybrikin.
Yeah, I want to get into the mystery of Hybrikin, what she actually represents in context to dark sorcery, and also why the gods prevented Thor from actually destroying her.
Yeah. I was really interested in that when you brought that up, and so I wanted to do some more research into it. I'll be honest, I have a lot more to go when it comes to her, but again, we look at the symbolism. It's the death of a celestial deity, which is Balder, and Balder is the soul. And he represents, the story of Balder represents human beings coming into incarnation, covered underneath the earth. The gods weeping over him is really what they do whenever a human soul comes into manifestation. Yeah, I need to kind of punch that up, because it's so easy right now to see human souls as being these chained victims of other beings, which can happen. I have no doubt that happens, especially if that's what they project on. But from the perspective of the gods, the soul, the human soul, is the thing in Asgard that brings the light and the joy to them. They mourn over the loss of that light. The death of Balder represents that. The mind, which is the moon, she has to go with him. Because what does she do? She reflects him. The moon reflects the light of the sun. She has to go into incarnation with him. So you never have a soul without a mind. Never. So they're doing their death ritual, and they're trying to push the boat, which says that the boat that he's on is the biggest possible boat. The gods can't even do it. The gods can't even bring us into manifestation. They can't do it. So they call upon Hybrikin, and maybe you pronounced it better than I did, Hybrikin. And she shows up as a giant whose name means smoky something. Something's having to do with smoke. That's the only part.
Smoked fire.
Right. So smoke represents illusion. And she comes riding a giant wolf, and she is using snakes, in order to guide the wolf. So wolves represent appetite. You can call them desire, you can call them whatever, but it's an appetite like...
Could you say in context to Hybrikin's wolf that this is the poisoned wolf?
It can be that. Again, it depends on which perspective you want to look through it.
Right.
I see her as death. So if you want to use the word poison, yes, she's death. Only death, which would be in connection to the Vanir and the Jotun. Jotuns represent the limiting forces of the universe: time, gravity, death. There are things that we perceive as these horrible things, but without them, the universe wouldn't function. The universe can't function without death and resurrection and all the stuff that, sadness and misery and happiness. We can't function with that. So she's riding that. Now, Odin's warriors couldn't even keep it still. They had to tackle it, which is what we do. So imagine the power she must have.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to ride that. And what does she use? She uses snakes, which represents all kinds of different things. Treachery, poison, secret knowledge, wisdom. Again, it depends on where you look at. And it just, on this perspective of the Aesir Vanir War, let me insert the Vedic tradition, which we can use to sort of give another window. Vedic tradition. The first deception in the universe is done by the celestial gods, not by the terrestrial gods. The terrestrial gods were teaming up with the celestial gods to help them stir up the nectar of immortality. And they were using a snake to stir it up. And they were all there in cooperation with the idea that everybody was going to get some and everybody was going to become immortal. And the gods, the celestial gods, went aside and said, we got to bullshit these guys because we can't let them have power.
Okay,
So
is that everything that you're saying in context to the golden apples?
Yeah. Yeah. Golden apples. It's not like, yeah, golden apples, again, the power, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Right. The nectar of immortality, eternal youth, all of that.
Oh, yeah. And of course, so whoever has the nectar of immortality is going to run the universe. So the celestial gods say, we want it because we don't want them to have it. So the snake, which is also Loki, Rahu in the Vedic tradition, he is the only one that goes and disguises himself as a celestial deity so he can get the nectar of immortality. Now he gets found out. As he's drinking it, he gets found out. And then Vishnu, who is dancing around pretending to be this beautiful woman, and all the rest of the terrestrial gods are looking at her with lust, and they forget about the nectar of immortality. This was all the conspiracy of the Aesir. So you think about what kind of people are the people who think about conspiracies the most. It is people who are conservative-minded, which means what? They are more likely to create conspiracies, which is why they're afraid of them. Like you said, it's the unconscious projection of their own guilt.
Yeah. Which then manifested with the Jotun, with Golveg, with Hyder and Arboda.
Yeah.
What do they actually all represent? Could you say that they are the shadow side of the Norns themselves?
Wow. That's deep. I mean, you can obviously see by my reaction that hit me pretty hard. I can't find any flaw in that thought process.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, let's do it.
The Norns. Again, I want to talk about where I learned this. You know, this experience came from. What we do is we use the 8-sided doors. We use the 8 gates. We use the whatever, however you want to look at it. And there's always, we're facing one of the 8 directions, and it's you're transferring energy. And bottom line is this: if you were to see me doing what looks like some strange, weird dance, you would see what looks like me pivoting into multiple directions of the 8 doors. My experience is that I'm not moving. I am having the doors move in front of me. Your perception is you see me move. When you fight a demon using this, they see you disappear and appear and disappear and appear because they can't move into multiple doorways like that. So when I think about the spindle of the Norns spinning time and creation and reality, our experience is that things are happening to us. And so we want to petition the Norns so that we can change that. But the Norns cannot be petitioned that way. There is a way to change that, but they will respond because they're forces of nature, and they have to respond to the laws of nature. That's how they function.
Okay, one question I have about the Norns real quick.
Yeah.
It says in the mythos that they are weaving the fates of gods and men. Right, there's that. But go a little bit deeper with it and consider that they are in the position to weave what we intend as individuals.
That's where I'm getting at, is that if they can only respond to the way that we are experiencing every moment, right? Because what happens is because time is not linear. There is the ever now, and then there is the creation of the past, and then the past creates the future, right? So what's happening is that if you continue to buy into whatever thought process you're choosing to indulge in, which is what we all do, we don't know it. We think we're happening to it and we're reacting, but it's just this self-repeating thing that we create. We indulge in a feeling which creates a past, which creates a future to which we react, which creates a feeling, and it keeps going on and on like that. But the moment that we have the power within us to stay in that neutral space, which is what I'm talking about, where everything else moves around you, You stay in that neutral space, you change your intention. You change what you choose to indulge in. And that then creates a different past, which creates a different future. The Norns haven't changed at all. You haven't altered them in the slightest bit. They are doing what they do. They are forces of nature, and they respond to the laws of nature. We are the only beings who have the ability to change our nature, which means when we do change our nature, the Norns respond, which means we have an experience that we've created something magical. And that's not what's happening. It's an illusion. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and this is one of the things that the Norns themselves revealed to me. I had an experience between 2000 and 2005. I was in the ministry at the time, and we were doing some kind of outreach shit. All these people came to the park and stuff, and we were on our way out when all of a sudden a young man appeared to me in the middle of the field, just out of fucking nowhere. Walks up to me, and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And he starts in telling me that I know more than everybody there. He starts just dropping bombs of knowledge, and I'm just like going, what the fuck is this guy even talking about? And he looks right at me, and he said, "Weep as to be wept."
Say that again? What did he say?
He said, "Weep as to be wept." He said, once you come into the understanding of this, you will have reached the point of being in alignment with your destiny. And it wasn't too long ago that the Norns actually came to me and told me the secret. And what they showed me is that they sit at the well of Urd and weep for what they weave. They weep for what they are weaving, because this is what we are intending, or whatever the fuck else is out there in context to the universe is intending. And they weep for what they weave. I said, oh my God, that is exactly what this guy was talking about. Okay. Now, when I was talking to him, this is fucking crazy. By the time we were full on into the conversation, it was just him and I in the middle of the field. And he was looking at, he had fire in his eyes, man. It was nuts. And I said, look, man, I got to go. I appreciate you coming to me and talking to me. As I started to walk away, I turned back. He was gone. This guy literally disappears from my sight. This is what he told me. He said, weep is to be wept. And so what I've come to realize with that, this is the secret of the Norns. And what the Norns want us to know. They want us to get control of our own individual spindles in context to the energy force within the circle of the magician, setting forth our intention and alignment. Otherwise, it's just going to be fucking chaos, death, destruction. Yes, that is a part of things, but that's not the ultimate outcome of the wisdom that's there, I think, for mankind. I think our generation and future generations need to know the result of war, but also the wisdom of peace in the midst of it, you know. And one of the things that really struck me, the token of the gods. They took this token and turned it into a man. And it was said that there was no question that he could not answer because he was wise, even beyond the gods. Like you were saying, he was human, but he knew it. He knew what the fuck was going on. And that, to me, was just absolutely fucking powerful, getting into self-study with this man. That is our potential here in Midgard, because all worlds of consciousness converge here. This is where it happens. As far as I'm concerned, we are in the highest realm that we could possibly ever fucking be in physicality. It's not out there. It's not in Asgard. It's not in Vanaheim. It's not there. It's all here. Right. It's all here.
This is the spearhead of evolution.
Right.
All of the deities, all of the entities of the universe are looking to us to spearhead their evolution. That's what we don't understand. And it's beautiful and tragic all at the same time, because the only way it can work is if we don't remember who we were. Because if we remembered who we were, then we're going to have a cheat sheet and it's not going to be honest. It won't work. It only works when it's happening honestly. What I mean by remember is, like, before I was incarnated, I was this this infinite spirit. Well, I don't remember that. I only remember being born and crying and, going through being a little kid. Because if we remembered that, there would be no urgency. There would be no possibility of being deceived. It's on that edge of in between being deceived and finding the truth within that. That's that emptiness space, that space of dynamic emptiness, that we can then intend something different and new each moment, which gives us a new timeline, which is when they're weaving timelines. And that's all that they're doing. We change which timeline they create. We do that.
Right.
But we don't think we do.
Right, and that is the secret of the Norns. That's what the Norns revealed to me.
Right.
We are the ones intending everything here in Midgard.
Right. So we're talking about the difference between the transformation of death, that kind of destruction into evolution, as opposed to pointless chaos destruction, which is just continuing to focus on, I wish I had that, and why can't they do this, and I did that, and that just creates more of that. And that's something to weep over.
Right.
I agree.